and we are going to be talking today a little bit about life in the corporate world, how it is for newbies to kind of get jobs, what it is to work for a startup, and so on and so forth. A very dear friend of mine, Madhav, recently passed out, started working, landed a great job, and he had some questions that he asked me, and we thought it would be of great benefit to a lot of people.
Good evening, Sumir bhai. I actually pitched this idea to you 6 months ago, and I am happy that delayed it because now at least have some experience to speak on. So a little background on me. I worked in a startup when I was in my college. I was doing my engineering. That was the only experience I had, and now I landed a role in multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. So it's 100% corporate culture. But I'm pretty sure a little bit of that element is there. You have worked in the biggest of places across the world, so I think you are the best person to ask these questions.
I've been through the grind. I've been through the good, bad, and ugly. I've been in the corporates. I've been in my own companies. I've been in startup. I've done a little bit of advisory.
Okay, should we just get a brief intro on how you started your career?
I actually started my career helping my dad out. I was studying in college and I would drive my dad to work every day, and I would drop him to his office. And after college was done, I'd go back to his office and work for him. And over some period of time, I then decided that I didn't want to work for the family business, and I struck out. And my dad was very supportive. He let me do what I wanted to do and follow my passion. And my journey has been eventful. I started off in the manufacturing business, exports, garments, metallurgy, metal fabrication. I got into financial services to start with stock brokerage. Then I got into loan syndication, debt syndication. Then I got into institutional stock brokerage, high net worth individual wealth management. And then the stock markets tanked. We had a big bull back then who really screwed everybody up. But a lot of my customers overtraded and we lost a lot of cash. You have to remember back then it was not as automated as it is today. So a lot of exposure, a lot of open positions, very little monitoring. And then I had to reinvent myself, languished for a very long time. And then I started applying for jobs and they weren't online. You had to do newspaper cuttings and, call people and send letters. And I finally got interviewed by a headhunter, set up an interview with a company in like 2 days flat. I went and met the CEO of the company. Then we had a 5-minute chat. He told me, okay, tell me in 5 minutes why I should hire you. And I gave him 5 minutes of my elevator pitch, so to speak. By the time I reached home that evening, there was an offer letter waiting for me. So my very first job was as the chief financial officer. And I joined one of the bigger banks in India. And then that was another bank. So I joined the technology side. So from financial service, I went into technology. And I've had a huge advantage ever since because I understand the business so well. It really helps on the technology side. So I had to learn enough about technology that I needed to know to run these companies and hold important positions over there. I think the turning point came in my life when I got recruited by one of the largest banks in the world. And I was hired out of India. I was moved to Chicago, then I was moved to London. And then I got into the startup game. I worked for a startup out of Dubai, and now I work for another startup. It's been a great run. It's been a heady run. So I've seen all kinds. I've seen the international conglomerates, the international financial institutions. I've seen the Indian financial institutions. So it's been a great mix. And then with the startup culture, with my manufacturing and trading background. So that's a little bit about me.
So you started up in a startup with your family, then went to the highest highs of corporate, and then came back to a startup. So you have had the complete journey. Now that you've spoken about your experience, I think you are somebody who's exactly like you said, the good, bad, and the ugly. So you have been through it, and I think you can give us practical advice. Nowadays on the internet, you see a lot of hate that's thrown towards corporate jobs. Now, I don't know if these are true or these are misconceptions, but I've written a few of them down. Firstly, the biggest misconception is when you're in a corporate job, you're not doing any meaningful work.
It's true that big corporates are much more bureaucratic. They're not as lean and nimble and mean as they should be. There's a lot of flab in the system. There's so many levels of hierarchy. So in many ways, you're a cog in the wheel. So that does happen, but it's not with all of them. There are some who kind of the way they work is they have a company within a company, and that kind of works very well. So they have smaller outfits that sitting within the parent outfit, and that kind of tends to work much better. But yes, I see a lot of people put on their profile and they'll say corporate slave because you have very little decision-making power. You're just supposed to follow instructions. Even the brightest of the brightest, they don't get the opportunity to shine as much as they can because there's very little initiative they can take. And if they do take initiative, then there's a whole bunch of levels of hierarchy that they kind of need to go through to kind of be noticed and to be seen. So yes, I would tend to agree, and that's why a lot of frustration, which is why there's a lot of attraction direction towards the startups as well. That's the direct answer to your question
Has
about
this
the
happened to
corporate
you?
setup. Fortunately not, because even in the Indian bank that I worked for, I was given a mandate because of my expertise. And I had very, very supportive bosses. And it was very flat. So I reported into a group general manager who reported into the MD. So the levels were not too many. And plus, I was considered a specialist in my field. Mind you, the advantage I had is because I started actually working for somebody much later in life. Before that, I'd pretty much worked for myself, right? I had enough years behind me where I could command that kind of respect because that's what I was hired for. That was the first one. The second, the large national bank organization that I worked for, the boss was phenomenal. Both my bosses were phenomenal. So I first reported to a guy who brought me in for spike. He deliberately, so this organization always hired from within. All of them were lifers. Somebody worked there for 15 years, 20 years, 25 years. So there was very little scope for outsiders to come in. But he deliberately hired an outsider because he wanted to bring in a fresh perspective. He wanted to bring in a pair of objective eyes. And he told me, he says, you're going to face a lot of obstacles, a lot of pushback, but I brought you here for a purpose. So if you face any pushback, come to me. And I think 50% of my time went in managing the politics as opposed to doing anything productive. Still, I had great support from my bosses and but the peers were, they were the ones who kept on trying to trip you up because they saw you suddenly succeed and go up the ladder very, very quickly. So I faced this, yes, absolutely.
Like you said, corporate, a lot of times it's not meaningful work, but people think that startups are very fun. Startups are very new. So
Right.
you have a lot to do. So is this true?
Right.
And to what extent is it true? And where do you disagree on this?
I'm actually writing an article. It's called Don't Work for a Startup. Whereas the title is negative, I kind of give the good and bad of both. I think working in the startup, depending on the culture and the environment and actually the promoters, because startups are effectively run by the promoters, right? So if the promoters are kind of first generation entrepreneurs, then you probably will face a lot of biases. You will face a lot of prejudices. They've given birth to this baby and they want to see the baby grow, and any little bit of disturbance they don't want to see because they feel they've created something and they will not brook any interference if you try to do things differently. However, if they've kind of been around the block a couple of times, they're serial entrepreneurs, then you'll find it a little bit easy. But coming directly to, let's say, the rank and file who start working for a startup is very fancy. And most of the time people go and work for startups because they think they'll get the ESOPs and there'll be multiplier effects and, they're going to make millions of dollars or millions of rupees when there's an exit. The exit events are very rare and there's a lot of hard work. The satisfaction in working for a startup is huge because you are creating something from scratch. You're creating something new. You're kind of breaking the mold. You're trying different stuff. And it tends to be 24/7 work because we don't watch the clock at all because you've got to deliver. You've got less access to resources. You can't hire absolutely top talent unless somebody's very passionate to go and work for a startup. The best of the best may not go and work for a startup. I think the lure of the lucre or the money is very, very high, but I think people don't pay enough consideration to the fact that, a large percentage of startups actually do fail. So in startups, you will face situations where you don't get paid on time, where, salaries are delayed, there'll be deferments, there'll be all kinds of stuff that be going on. And you've got to have a very strong back and a very sane head and a very calm mind to actually weather those storms if they do come up. Gone are the days when the VCs and the PEs would put in, huge amounts of money into startups and they would be able to pay them till kingdom come. Now I think startups are finding it more difficult. Access to cash is not as easy as it used to be because earlier the funding pattern was they would actually go and look at how much cash you're going to burn, and based on the cash burn, they'd give you money. That's gone. A lot of the PEs and VCs are looking at profitability as opposed to actually, before we come to financial, let's look at what motivates you personally. Doing something great, doing something very challenging, doing something which is absolutely really cutting edge and cool, then by all means, you can go to startups because startups tend to employ the latest technologies. They're willing to learn. It's a very young crowd.
Just mentioned that if VCs are asking how quickly you'll turn a profit, and you said gone are the days where they just invest money. I have seen what you're saying now in a very small scale in my hometown where I've
Right.
attended pitch fests. When I see companies on a national scale, VCs are still just throwing money on them and seeing who can burn through it the fastest.
Okay, so I won't take names, but these are household names. It's apps that we use on a day-to-day basis. They've got obscene amounts of money invested in them. And you know what? For the next 5 to 10 years, they'll never turn a profit. I think here it's a question of, what kind of market share they're going to acquire. There are side plays, for example, what kind of data they're getting because of, enrolling people on their apps. So they're trying to make money through, supplementary income and not from their core business. What kind of data they're gathering, what kind of eyeballs they get, what kind of market penetration they have, what kind of tie-ups they can get. But even that, it seems, is not enough for them to turn a profit. Yeah, we've seen huge deals, and I look and I say that, my God, why are we even investing money in these kind of companies? Somebody's got to have their brains wired incorrectly. But I'm not a VC, I'm not a PE, so I don't know what is their mindset. But from an investment perspective, I respect people like, let's say, George Soros or Warren Buffett. Their philosophy is fundamentals. They look at profitability. For example, Warren Buffett, he doesn't invest in any company that has got off-balance sheet income. He'll not look at companies that have got derivatives. So he says it very publicly. These are investors, who've made money. They exactly know how the markets work, but not everybody is like them. They're very sane, they're very fundamental, and they do extremely well. But there are other Ps and VCs who just throw money at people and say, okay, fine, here, go burn it. I wish I could get that kind of.
Could we just expand on what PEs are and what VCs
basically, venture capital is more in terms of, the whole startup game. And then it's become a sophisticated market. So there's early stage. There's, people who are, let's say, first round seed funding, angel funding, Series A, Series B. Because each one has got a very different mindset and very different philosophy of why they invest and what kind of companies they invest in. Because their target and their view of the market is very, very different. So yeah, finally, why do people take jobs, right? It's finally to make money, right? Depending on your appetite, you're like a businessman, you're not different. Like depending on your appetite to kind of earn money and how much money you can risk or how much money you can forego, that's a very fundamental basis on which you will take a decision, which kind of company. So some people will go for stability. It's like, in India, government jobs used to be viewed as phenomenal jobs because of security and gratuity and retirement benefits. That's changing a little bit with the younger generation, of course, but that still is predominantly a mindset. Now, let's extrapolate that into, let's say people like you, but you as well, because you've spent money on your education, you need to, it's an IRR, right? It's your rate of return saying that, okay, I've spent so much money, I've spent time, I want to earn my money back within a certain period of time, right?
Yes.
So you may have a college loan, you may have an education loan, you may have some kind of a bank loan, you may have some liabilities, you may have parents who are dependent on you. So these will all be considerations that you would kind of keep in mind to, go and see what kind of a job you're getting. Getting a job is easy, it's not difficult at all. But what kind of job, whether it suits your mindset, whether it suits your financial circumstances, whether it suits your personal goals is very, very important. In the old days, Naukri lag gayi, everyone used to clap hands and mithai bantenge, we'll go and distribute sweets. But that's not the case anymore. And I think today it's very, very important for you to take a call. Should I do startup? Should I go and do a corporate? Should I do a large corporate? You will keep on taking home your paycheck on a day-to-day basis. But the kind of work that you do may not be very exciting. But if it is somebody like you, Madhav, who's very hungry to do great work, and you're constantly thinking of things that you can do in a better way, or what kind of roles you can get, and what your career objectives should be, what kind of field you should get into, then all of these things are some things that you need to consider. Getting a job is no different than running your own business. Finally, money talks, right? You got to provide for, and things are so much more expensive than they were earlier. Buying a house is an obscene amount of money. Getting married and having kids is responsibility. You've got those years, between let's say 23, 24 to 30 to kind of take whatever risks you want. But beyond the point, once you've gone through the learning, joining a startup to learn is a fantastic thing because you learn stuff that you will never learn in a larger organization. That said, a lot will still depend on you because the startups and the smaller organizations will not have very robust training plans. So you will not have training curriculum, you will not have training activities, you will not have a trainer, you will not get soft skills training and so on and so forth. But if you are a go-getter and if you're a self-starter, you can use your experience of working in a startup as well as self-educating over a period of time. So if I was to hire somebody, I would definitely look at somebody who's worked in a startup. Why? He knows knows the value of money, knows to manage within limitation. So that would be a great attraction for me. So very often when people come to the company that I'm working at, and we've had these experiments where we've tried to hire some heavy hitters, I think I'm the only heavy hitter they hired. And they're very apprehensive because I work for very large banks. I've lived overseas. I mean, I've lived on 4 continents. I've traveled to 40 countries. Saying you're bringing in this heavy hitter, will he really fit into our culture? Fortunately, I'd worked for a startup for 7 years before I joined these guys. And there I learned the whole startup game. How do you manage a startup? What are the challenges? And, of course, I burnt my fingers really badly there in terms of financially, which, of course, story you know about, Madhav, and I won't get into that here. That kind of helped me land on my feet and helped me to blend in and help me to take the right decisions. I would always prefer somebody who's worked in that environment because they are lean, they're mean, they're hungry, they've survived tough times, and they understand the value of what they do. They understand the value of money. They understand a culture which is more like a family culture as opposed to, very widely dispersed and, disjointed organization, one hand not knowing what the other hand is doing.
Okay, so I think sometime about last year, mid last year, we had this big debate on moonlighting. One of the major MNCs had fired a lot of their employees because they found out they were doing 2-3 jobs at one time. When you say 2 full-time jobs, then I get it. That can be unethical. I think the line gets very blurry when you talk about doing a full-time job, then going to your house and then doing a part-time job or working on your own business. How would you define moonlighting, and to what extent do you think it is fine, and after when does it become unethical?
Let's look at the genesis of moonlighting. The genesis of moonlighting, and it became a big thing during the lockdown. There was moonlighting going on all the time, right? But it went to a different dimension and different kind of spin because of work from home. Business had slowed down. Delivery pressures were not as high. So people had time on their hands. And they said, okay, sitting home, we can make additional income. Why not? First of all, I believe moonlighting is unethical if you have a full-time job. If you're a full-time employee, then it's unethical. Now, yes, there's arguments that will say that whatever I do after I fulfilled my office duties and my office work is none of your business. I agree, I have no problem. But let's break down 24 hours a day, right? So let's say 8 hours at work, 24 less 8 is what?
16.
How many hours do we sleep? Let's say 8 hours. Okay, so that leaves you with 8. Out of 8 hours, getting ready, dinner, lunch, travel, blah, blah, blah. Let's say 3 hours a day. That leaves you with 5 hours. Out of the 5 hours, cafe, friends, so on and so forth, 2 hours. That leaves you with 3 hours. In the 3 hours, now factor in even, let's say, family time. You actually speaking, if your free time is going to be maximum 2 to 3 hours a day, and then factor in things like gym and so on and so forth. On the ethical front, staying true to the company you're working for. 2 is not working for a company that's going to be in direct competition with your employer. These are the 2 fundamental rules that anybody should follow when you're looking at moonlighting. And the third thing is, even if you're doing this moonlighting, when you go back to work, you have all your mental faculties and your energy levels to do the best at that job. I think the big hue and cry was that it was not the fact that people were moonlighting. It was more about IP that is being leaked out by working for somebody else, copying and pasting code from one place to another. Moonlighting happens mostly in the tech business, right? And then it was also things like sales leads, names of customers being exchanged with another employer. So I think these were the things that drove this big debate. That said, you are free to be a gig worker. And if you're a gig worker, then you don't have a single employer. You're a free agent. So if you really want to moonlight and stuff like that, then be a gig worker. But on one side, you want financial security of having a regular income, and on the other side, you want additional income as well. That I think is not right.
No, I agree with you when you mentioned that people were leaking IPs or copy pasting code. That is just fraud, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now, let's say I'm not happy with the job I have, okay? And I cannot afford to quit this job and take, let's say, 6 months to a year to develop the skills to move where I want to or where I think there is potential. You say I have only 2-3 hours in a day. How do I factor in all the learning that I need and all the real world experience I need before I can get another full-time job in this new career field?
Okay, I'll ask you a question. And when you're doing business, there's something known as it's the cost of doing business. So when you're doing business, you take risks. Just because you're uncertain about what is the role that you want to play or whether this is the kind of job that you want or not, doesn't necessarily mean that you can go and, candy stripe or moonlight or whatever we call it at the cost of somebody else to pick up a new trade so you can quit the job. And that, according to me, is not a very fair thing to do. That said, I think you can do these kind of things in your spare time. You've got Saturdays, you've got Sunday, you've got off days. I think to go and pick up a new trade and to learn something new is not wrong at all. That's one. The second thing is, if you're going to do something which is a non-competitive line, I also also accept that as a young student and as a person who's just started working, you may not have the luxury of time, and you can't afford to take 6 months off to learn a new trade or learn a new line of business or learn something new, a new technical stuff to go and, land on your feet. I understand that completely, because, at that point in time, you can't afford to waste 6 months. You may not have the financial capacity to bear 6 months of pay. Or there are ways and means to do it, not opposed to it. There are a few employees who will help you upskill, reskill. If there's room in the organization, that's an opportunity people may want to explore. Not very easily done, because not many companies help in lateral moves, so to speak. They prefer to hire within the silo for that specialization. They don't look at lateral hiring. So I think it's a trade-off. It's finally a very personal decision. But in my opinion, I've always conducted myself in a manner that I've been very true to the organization I've worked with. A lot of people have come to me throughout my career and says, "Hey guys, you have so much expertise. Why don't you help me out with this? Why don't I pay you a consultancy fee?" As far as moonlighting is concerned, let me share with you something personal, right? So years ago, I think maybe 10, 15 years ago, somebody reached out to me on my LinkedIn profile and said that, "Hey, listen, you know what? We've got tons of expertise. We love your profile. We have a lot of customers who come to us for assignments. So all you do is go and register you and me or anybody can go and register your profile from any walk of life or any field of activity, any specialization. And based on their search engine or their customer search criteria, they come to you and say, hey, listen, there's this consulting gig. It's a 1-hour phone call that the customer wants to have with you. If you're kind of pre-selected, they'll arrange an interview with their customer. They'll moderate. They make you sign a declaration that it's all non-compete and this and that and everything. So once every couple of months or once every month, I would get an assignment where I need to get onto the phone on a Saturday or a Sunday or, at some point in time during the day. They'd ask me a whole bunch of questions based on my expertise. I'd give them the answers. That's also one kind of moonlighting, if you ask me.
Samir bhai, let's get to the juicy bits of the podcast. Let's get to the topic of office politics. I'm going to shoot you a few questions and I'm going to hand it over to you. What is office politics? Is it there everywhere? How does it work? Should I get involved?
Okay, so one at a time. Office politics is just a lack of transparency. One playing somebody against the other, going in backbiting and bitching, trying to pip the other person to the post, trying to get brownie points with your bosses, trying to wine and dine people and, moving stuff outside of the office. Let's have this discussion over chai ka tapri, or let's go and have a sutta and discuss this and discuss that. Isne aisa kiya, usne aisa kiya. Why did he do this? What did he think of himself? Oh, the boss doesn't say anything to him, but he makes me work very hard. That's office politics at the very basic level. Then when you go to the boardroom and at that the CXO level, then that's a different dimension of politics and it gets even more deadly. So that's information not being shared transparently. Perks that are given to different employees at different points in time, not sharing transparently, not telling this department that is going on, not telling that department which is going on. So these are the kind of things that go on at that level. Divide and rule is politics. I mean, that's the ultimate in terms of politics. Play one against the other, align with somebody.
You say it's a lack of transparency. What I have felt is that when you cram everybody in one office, right? You see them every day. I can be professional with somebody for a week. That's okay. But after some time, you start to notice their flaws and you start to get a little annoyed by people. Maybe that's when you get the urge from the inside to just vent about somebody.
Venting it's human nature, because you've got to let loose. You need a release. That I think is acceptable. The best way to vent is actually go and tell the other person, listen, you're pissing me off. Rather than go and talk to somebody else. Go and tell him directly, hey, listen, you know what, you did this, I didn't like it at all, I'm just letting you know. So the person is forewarned. If he continues to do that because that's his second nature, then you say, okay, listen, you do your own thing, I'll do my own thing. Let's not interfere with each other. Let's just work together. As they say, familiarity breeds contempt, right? So when you're too confined and you're too closed environment, when you're sitting with somebody all the time, it does tend to get on your nerves.
If a lot of this is human nature, venting, all this, should one get involved in office politics? If yes, to what extent?
You can't help but get involved in office politics, because in some way, shape or form, you will get dragged into it. So you got to play the smart game. Participating in office politics is aligning yourself with certain forces, right? That's not what you should do. So you can get involved in the politics to facilitate an outcome, but going and aligning yourself as as the breeze sways the grass in a certain direction. That's something that you shouldn't do. If this guy seems to be more powerful today, so I'll start, if the boss is favorable to him and the boss keeps on saying, I will align myself with that person. That's also politics. But I think the best way, you can't stay completely out of it. If you stay completely out of it, you're out of the game. You've got to play the game. Unfortunately, you've got to play the game. You don't have a choice. You can't say that I'm going to remain unscathed by this. I'm not going to be touched by this. But participating to an extent where you're going to harm somebody is not on. Participating in politics, it means keeping your antenna, being alert all the time. Navigating the politics is also playing politics. So you navigate. You're playing politics with the objective of navigating it in a certain way and navigating it from a point of view of least resistance. So I allow it. It's like jujitsu. With jujitsu, what's the art of jujitsu? You use the other person's force against him. You just kind of sidestep and let him go away. And that's exactly what you should be doing. Aligning yourself, participating, getting into gossip mode, all of that is something that you should avoid because that's actually unethical.
I think it's different with everybody. We're all different. I set up a hypothetical situation. There are two people in a senior post and I am just a trainee. I am nobody. I just joined the company. And these two guys have a disagreement. Somebody tries to remove their frustrations on me, but I stop them right there because I have personal boundaries. The third person sees that and thinks that I have a problem with the second person. They come to me and be like, okay, dude, this guy has done this. This is how he is. I don't like him. What are your thoughts?
Don't encourage it. Because for one reason is it drags you into it. But there's another reason behind it because you don't know how your response will be used against you. Don't take everybody at face value. Because in a job, everybody is there to succeed. Everybody is there to get ahead. Yeah. Some people will get ahead because of their capabilities and some people will get ahead by licking somebody else's ass. If you think it's going to have a bearing on you, by all means, drill down and find out what is going on. So that's an art.
That'll come with experience, I guess. Huh?
And my typical response is my gut feel response. And then I realized, hey, every time you do gut feel, you get into trouble. And my boss came and told me, boss, you can't do this. This is what's hidden. This is what's behind it. This is what's only appearing. But behind this, there is something else. Please learn to read between the lines. And that is something that you seriously need to learn.
I think this piggybacks on the next question, which is friendships in the workplace.
There's no such thing as friendship in the workplace. They are only acquaintances.
Till what extent do you think somebody's an acquaintance?
A friendship is somebody who you can walk out of the workplace and leave work at the workplace. It's a friendship. I'm just going to have a beer. But when I sit down for a beer, I'm not going to sit and talk about work. I'm not going to backbite. I'm not going to bitch. I can confide. I can share. But you got to make sure that, see, a friendship is a friendship between equals, right? So if somebody is being friendly with you or if you're being friendly with somebody with an ulterior motive or with an objective, then it's not really a friendship. It's a need-based relationship. So I count my friends on the palm of both my hands. It used to be one hand, now it's two hands. But that's how I count my friends. The rest of them are all acquaintances. I know them very well, but they're not necessarily my friends.
So how open can I be with these acquaintances?
Be guarded. If it's work, be guarded. Don't play your cards very close to the chest. Unless you establish that rapport, you're very open-minded, you're very like-minded, you know that the information that you're going to be passing on is not going to be misused, not used against you. Say something and you'll know where it's come back. And you'll know whether that guy is your friend or not. That is playing politics. That is playing politics, but you're doing it only with the objective of safeguarding yourself. You have no malicious intent. Coming back, you can become friends with people at work, but it's something that you need to be very judicious about.
All these friendships at the workplace and all this office politics will eventually, if we get involved, I'm pretty sure they will ruin our relationships with our managers, which, I mean, bosses, they just call managers now. How important is your relationship with your manager?
Everything depends on your manager. Your promotion, your increment, your leaves, everything. Recommendations, recognition depends on your manager. So there's two types of managers. One is a manager that is there to lift people up, raise people up from their standard and actually guide and mentor them. And there are other managers who are kind of stepping on, on the toes and on the head of their subordinates to get ahead. There are some managers who will give you credit and there are some managers who will take the credit. Regardless of what he's like, your equation with your manager needs to be very, very solid.
How do you build this relationship?
The best way to do it, let him know that you're going to make him look good. Let him depend on you. Be his go-to guy for everything.
Okay, let's say I become his right-hand man. I become the person they depend on. Now, to what extent do I allow this and where do I set my personal boundaries, and will me setting boundaries cause a negative effect with them?
It's an art. You have to set boundaries. Setting boundaries is a very healthy thing. It's the way that you communicate setting that boundaries which is fundamentally important. You need not necessarily tell a person, hey, listen, I can't be there after 6 o'clock because every day I've got to go to the gym at 6 o'clock. Because the guy then in his scheme of things, going to a gym may hold no value at all. He say, hey, chhodna tera gym, there's work to be done, you sit. You don't owe anybody an explanation as to why you follow a certain routine. All you have to say very generically, I follow a routine, I'm available to them. If there's a burning fire, there's an emergency, I'm available to you. But as a matter of practice, this is where I draw the line, plain and simple. I have a personal life and there's stuff that I need to do for myself.
So no further explanation.
No need. Yeah, you don't owe them an explanation for your personal time.
Will that cause a negative effect, like a negative impression about me to them?
It depends on the maturity of the person that you're dealing with. So if the person is a mature person, then you can actually tell the person what your interests are, what your likes are, and they'll kind of look out for you and they'll cover for you and they'll give you that slack or they'll give you the time that you need. But there's other managers who don't consider these things important. And it's a question of they've gone through the grind and they want to put everybody else through the grind. They don't give a damn. They're not sensitive at all. So they will probably take it negatively. But again, a lot of it depends on the kind of rapport and equation you build with them.
Okay, apart from being like the go-to person, how else can I improve my relationship?
Kind, be considerate, be available to them if they are overloaded with stuff, offer to do stuff for them. Can I take care of this? Go and proactively tell them, listen, I have time on my hands. Can I do something else? Make suggestions to them. If you're working for a small organization, it's easily noticed. When you're working for a larger organization, it can be a little bit more difficult because you and your manager are both cogs in the wheel. And if he considers himself to be a cog in the wheel and got no aspirations to move ahead in life, then you're going to have a difficult time. Because he doesn't want to move ahead, because he doesn't want to work hard, he's not going to be very appreciative of you wanting to move ahead in life, because he'll always be living in fear that mere aage nikal jayega. Ab aaj ka bachcha hai, wo mere se zyada janta hai. All of these kind of things you'll hear.
So there's this one session that we had here with a psychologist, and one thing she recommended and she really insisted us on doing is sit down with our manager like once or twice in a month and seek feedback. Now somebody I know has done this. Their manager is like, what feedback can I give you? Keep doing your work. So how do I seek meaningful feedback? Is it the questions I ask them? How do I handle it?
Some people like to do it formally, where you'll actually set up a session, you'll have a feedback session. You can just go and ask a very vague and general question saying, hey, listen, what do you think about my performance? And he'll say, I like this, I like that, I like the other, I don't like this, I don't like. There are other people who will not volunteer. You'll have to kind of scratch the surface a little deeper and you'll have to say, okay, what do you think about my contribution? Is my attitude correct? Is my technical capabilities okay? Do I understand? So I think asking leading questions and asking for suggestions and asking for feedback is fundamentally important. I think it's a great thing to do. But again, it depends who you're asking it from. Some people can also interpret, asking for feedback as, oh, mereko maska laga hai. He's trying to butter me up. He's trying to flatter me. So it's very, how you approach it is very, very delicate. You just do it informally and say, I'd like to meet you up with a cup of coffee. I want to discuss, my career, my future prospects, and I want to share with you my experience over here. And then during that session, you can have a very open and interactive session. These are the things that I think we can improve. This is what I like. This is something that I don't like. That's the kind of conversation you can veer to. It's good. It'll also help you because when you ask these questions, you'll also understand your manager's mindset. It'll reveal a lot to you as well. So it's a two-way mechanism. When you're asking for feedback, you're also going in to get the other person's perspective, which is as important as that person forming an impression about you.
Sameer bhai, ever since the lockdown started, there's been this phrase that's been thrown out a lot called quiet quitting. It basically means people work exactly what they've been told to and for exactly the amount of time that they were assigned, and then they leave. They forget about their work. They don't care about increments. They don't care about scaling up. Do you think this is because corporate culture or capitalist culture has gone to a point where it doesn't matter how loyal you are to the company is not loyal to you. They're only loyal to the money.
So I'll ask you a series of questions and the answers will kind of come from the questions themselves. Who's the corporate owned by? Shareholders. Shareholders are the investors and they are the ones who are getting the returns, right? So your board of directors, your managing director, the chairperson, all of them, all the top executives, they are only bothered about what the investors are actually saying. A corporate is a heartless entity. It has no soul. The corporate exists for itself. Even the chairman of the company and the managing director and the CEO is not the corporate. He is an employee of the corporate. Like any other employee, CEOs will come and go. Giving your loyalty to an organization, according to me, You've got to be as money-minded as the corporate is. The corporate only believes in the top line and the bottom line. What do corporates do when times are bad? They'll cut you, right? Why? I give this advice to anybody and everybody I know. If you find a better opportunity and you find that your future in this place is not okay, find another job and move on. Loyalty is great. Loyalty is very important, but loyalty beyond a point is stupid. Ask me. I stayed loyal to a startup for 7 years and I walked away losing $500,000. I was stupid. It not only impacted me, impacted my entire family. It impacted my retirement plan. Be very wary when you do that. There are some organizations that do have hearts. They do have souls. Read a book called Soul Incorporated. There are some organizations that truly believe in their employees. They truly believe. They'll not lay off. They'll not fire. They'll not kind of look at what happened during COVID. So many companies cut wages, this, that, everything. It was for survival. But there were other companies who say we are not going to do it. We'll eat the loss. There are other companies who did things like they did deferments. They said, we'll defer your salary to make sure that the cash flows don't kill us. Negative cash flows don't kill us for those few months and all. And they made it up when things got back to normal. They paid out the deferments.
Would you want to name out a few companies that really believed in their employees during tough times?
Tata's, right? Statements where he said, no, I'm not going to terminate. I'm not going to fire. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to scale back. I'm not going to cut down. I'm not going to fire people. In my opinion, they're one of the most ethical companies, groups anywhere in the world. And that happens because there's no real owner. Right? Even let's say people like Ratan Tata and, JRD Tata and all, their stake in the company was very low. Their whole objective was different. It's their culture, it's their DNA, it's their mindset, how they've been brought up. They're more philanthropists. Take somebody like Bill Gates. Look at, look at how much philanthropic work he does. He's completely stepped back. He's handed over his reins to somebody else and said, okay, I'm going to do this. This is what I do. He's looking at climate change. He's looking at this. He's looking at that. Hugely profitable organization, right? Take somebody like George Soros. He donates so much of his wealth to charity every single year. I think 1/3 or something of his wealth is donated to charity. So no matter how obscenely rich you may be, to give away 1/3 of your wealth is not a joke. So I think companies, there are a few companies, but keep in mind that companies exist for themselves. Their loyalty lies with the investors because the investors drive the decisions that they take. Being an employee, you kind of, always have your antenna up and say, where is it going? If you find that they're being grossly unfair to you, then the writing's on the wall.
Working hard, yes. To what extent? Will I be exploited for working hard? It seems like a very contradictory question.
No, it's not. I think it's a great question. American football, the quarterback is, let's say, the CEO of the company, is the captain of the team, right? The quarterback passes the ball to a runner. What is the runner's job? Is to cover 10 yards or to, score a touchdown and then a field goal, right? So the quarterback will always give the ball to the runner or to the receiver who's going to obtain the maximum number of yards. He'll always have his favorites because that guy will always come through for him. What happens very often is that these runners or these receivers get overworked, muscle fatigue, their knees will break, all that kind of stuff happens because they've been exploited. They've not been rested. You'll see in team games also that certain member of the team is not going to be played. They're going to rest him for this match. Those are prudent decisions that the captains and decision makers do take. But if you find that constantly you're the one who's given the ball and nobody gives a damn of your well-being, then that's again somewhere that you need to draw the line. So in our early days, we want to please and we want to be recognized. So you'll do anything and everything that's asked of you, right? You become the go-to person. But it's also a trap. It's a snare because if you're always the go-to person, as a boss, I'd say, I'll give Madhav work because Madhav will always come through for me. Now, Madhav may come through for me, but Madhav will be doing it for two reasons. One is because he wants to be recognized, and the second, because he wants to excel, he wants to please, and the second is that he feels valued. If you're the go-to person and you're working hard and you feel valued in terms of monetary reimbursement as well as recognition for your efforts, then I don't think it's a bad thing. It's a choice that you make. There are different ways to motivate people, right? So if you stay motivated and rather if you are motivated by the recognition you're given, but if you feel that it's a good learning experience for you by going that extra mile, I don't think there's any harm in it, at least in the early days, because you've got to make your mark, right? You've got to be noticed. It actually doesn't work well for your bosses because you become the single point of failure. What happens if you're not there? What happens if you're in? If the bosses are smart, they'll make sure that they have a lineup or they have a backup somewhere or the other. They're completely impervious to that, then they're setting themselves up for disaster.